Introduction. In the dark of night, I looked over at my brother with incredible envy. I would do anything to be him right now. In a matter of minutes, my back rub had gone from comforting to uncomfortable to completely violating. Can he hear my heart beating out of my chest? Does he know I'm not asleep? Nothing was okay. I could never be the same after this. This can't be happening. He would never do that to me, I told myself. I held my breath and counted down the hours until morning when it would all be over. But it was only the beginning of a nightmare at the hands of my best friend, the beginning of a self-destructing attempt to numb the pain, and eventually the beginning of a journey towards wholeness and healing, something I could never have imagined existed after a lifetime of abuse. My name is Amanda Sarate. This is my story of how, against all odds, I fought against the current which tried to take my soul, and I came out victorious. Sex, lies, legal injustice, family dysfunction, and church cover-ups all led to the impending explosion of my life, a misguided missile headed for destruction, when an unlikely twist changed the trajectory of my life forever. What evil meant to harm me, God intended for good. Those same experiences later became lessons of true love, forgiveness, compassion, and supernatural strength. This is my story of how I became an overcomer fighting for me. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, Born Strong. I was born into a family of Jehovah's Witnesses in Redmond, Washington on March 2nd, 1981. Although quite a sleepy town, Redmond is best known as the home of Microsoft and Nintendo's corporate offices. My family lived in Bellevue, the next city over. Tall green trees, plush lawns, and either a creek, pond, or lake almost anywhere you turned made this one of the most beautiful places in the world to call home. The frequent rain kept everything very green throughout the seasons. My mom and dad fell in love and got pregnant with me while they were in high school. They quickly planned their wedding and got married before I was born. Dad wore a brown tuxedo and Mom wore an elegant cream-colored lace wedding dress with long sleeves. He was white and she was black. Even in the 80s, interracial marriage was a big deal. My parents often got glares in public and rude comments, but they didn't mind because they were happy together. My mom and dad were both 17 when I was born. Mom dropped out of high school to have me, but still got her GED. She was never one to give up or do things the easy way. We all went to live with my mom's parents until mom and dad could get a place of their own. I was born with a condition called pyloric stenosis, which meant a muscle clamped off my intestines, causing me to projectile vomit everything I ate. At 2 months old, I was starving to death and needed surgery. My family's religion prevented me from having a blood transfusion, and in the 80s, bloodless surgery was not regarded as safe. After being denied by many doctors, my family finally found a surgeon willing to operate on me without consenting to a blood transfusion. My parents were told children who survive pyloric stenosis are either incredibly weak or incredibly strong. I was crazy strong. While I looked scrawny, I possessed an inner strength which allowed me to beat almost anyone. At 2 years old, I could do sit-ups and push-ups like a professional athlete. I can't remember a time in my life where I didn't have a remarkably strong core. My dad was proud of me and would show off my muscles to all of his friends. At age 12, I could beat adults in arm wrestling matches. I loved being known as the tough one. One time, Dad and I were waiting in line at the grocery store. I looked up at him, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds. "I can pick you up," I said confidently. "No, you can't." I was only 5, but I grabbed him by the legs, picked him up, and carried him around in circles. He just laughed and let me walk as far as I could. Dad was the fun parent to talk to. He and I could talk for hours and laugh about anything. He was quick to make fun of people, situations, and himself, so we laughed all the time. We loved learning rap songs and shopping together. He had a big smile with square teeth and straight brown hair, 2 traits I inherited. Growing up, I was constantly told I looked just like him. Dad was my biggest supporter and always believed in me. 2 years after I was born, my parents had my brother, Brandon. Mom stayed home with my brother and me until I went to kindergarten. My dad was always so happy to see us when he got home from work, and he would play with us for hours. Dad loved playing tag, playing catch, and teaching us songs and games. He enjoyed taking us on bike rides, which Brandon hated, but my dad and I loved them. We'd plan camping, hiking, and group trips together. In the summertime, he used to mow patterns of grass in the front lawn, and we would play tag for hours while jumping from one long grass patch to another. Before I could ride a bike, my dad would take me to empty parking lots and let me sit on his lap and steer the car while he pushed the pedals. I could not wait to drive on my own one day. No matter how tired he was, Dad always played with us. He was a big kid. When I started kindergarten, Dad chaperoned one of my field trips, and all the kids thought he was my brother. He and I got a kick out of that. Before we left on the bus, Mrs. Case asked if we had any questions. Dad raised his hand and asked, "Is it snack time yet?" All the kids laughed, and so did the teacher. He wasn't afraid to be silly, and I loved that. When I was 4 years old, we moved into a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home just down the street from my grandparents' house. I have so many great memories there. I had a huge backyard. My grandparents bought me a swing set with a slide and one of those life-size doll houses to play in. I was a sweet and stubborn child, full of life, sass, and energy. One of my favorite things to do outside was play in the mud and climb up on the fence which separated our yard from the neighbors. The view from so high up was amazing. My dad would spank me just about every day for sitting up there. He claimed I was going to fall and get hurt. Ironically, I never fell, but his belt beatings hurt like crazy. Mom was a beautiful, petite Black woman. Her name was Gwendolyn Denise Sams, but she went by Gwen or Gwenny. She was 5'1", 105 pounds. She resembled Whitney Houston with a smile that could light up a city and an unforgettable laugh to match. She had a wicked sense of humor and loved to laugh about the stupidity of others. She was totally okay pissing people off and in fact went out of her way to do it. My mom was into fashion. Her favorite store was Nordstrom, and she would buy brightly colored sports coats to wear over loud floral printed dresses. She owned more shoes than she could ever wear. Mom used to tell me, if you can't feel good, look good. If you can't look good, smell good. We lived by that saying. We could tell what kind of day anyone in the family was having based on the outfit and smell they were sporting that day. Since Mom was so young, she was into all the latest pop music, dances, and fashion. Some of my favorite memories with her are us cuddling together to warm our feet over the heat register on the floor and dancing to music videos on VH1. I would run to put on her high heels and pretend I was one of the ladies playing guitar in Robert Palmer's Addicted to Love music video. Mom and I both loved Paula Abdul's music video for Cold Hearted Snake and would run and slide on our knees just like Paula. This seems so normal to me. Now that I have kids, I can't imagine showing them that video. Oh my goodness. Mom had so much life and fierceness within her and never apologized for how much space her personality took up. She wasn't a loud person, but she was okay showing up, planting a bomb of controversy, and smiling on her way out. Anyone hoping to persuade her with public opinion would be disappointed. A popular Bobby Brown song in the 90s became her motto. "It's my prerogative." I'm sure y'all remember that one. In the school parking lot one afternoon, a teacher tried to tell Mom to move her car. Mom tried to run her over, and the lady had to jump up the wooden steps in front of a large dumpster to avoid getting hit. A couple of years later, Mom saw that same teacher in a grocery store and purposely ran her cart into the teacher's cart. She was fearless and crazy. It felt safe to be with her because she was a badass. Mostly bad, though. Mom grew up calling her mom and dad by their first names, so I always called my grandma Ellen and my grandpa Jay. I knew they were my grandparents, but I never called them grandma or grandpa, ever. Since it was understood that they were mom and dad, Ellen had told her kids that they could call them by their first names. I know this is strange to most people. I get it. But it worked for us. In fact, as a kid, I felt it would be mean to call my grandparents grandma and grandpa because those titles sounded so old. Ellen and Jay were very involved in my life. We visited them almost every day, and if we didn't, my mom would talk to Ellen on the phone for hours. Ellen was 5'6" with short black curls. She was a mix of African American and Choctaw Indian. The Native American was prominent in her features, especially in her very soft hair. She wore glasses, loved hard candies, and had a sense of style like my mom. She loved bright colors and had closets full of clothes and shoes. Ellen loved to buy things for her grandkids. She was known in the congregation for being very generous and buying clothes for everyone. Ellen was a master at bargain shopping. She once purchased an adorable, new-looking couch for 99 cents. Most things she bought only cost her $1, but you would never know it. Ellen was very loving and protective of her grandkids. If my parents tried to discipline us or tell us we couldn't have a piece of candy at her house, she would defend us and insist we got whatever we wanted. Ellen wanted us to go with her everywhere, and for the most part, we did. Brandon and I often went on trips with my grandparents. We mostly made vacations out of Jay's business trips in Washington and Oregon, but we also traveled to Ohio to see my grandma's family a few times. As amazing as she was towards the grandkids, Ellen was the bad news person in the family. She was always telling us what to do, what not to do, what to eat, what not to eat, so we wouldn't get cancer. All while somehow managing to throw a scripture in there so we couldn't argue with her. If she knew you were sensitive about something, Ellen was the type of person who wouldn't hesitate to bring it up. She wasn't afraid of conflict. In fact, she seemed to love it and rarely offered an apology. She was incredibly loving and equally stubborn. My grandpa Jay was a handsome, 6-foot-tall Black Army veteran. He worked in the insurance business and always wore a suit, tie, and suspenders, even when he was not working. He loved jazz music and watching sports. Jay loved to go for walks. He and I would often walk to the grocery store for fun and get small items like bread, bacon, bubble gum, or my favorite caramello candy bars. We were walking down the sidewalk in Bellevue one day when a police officer stopped to question us. The officer thought Jay had kidnapped me and stopped to see if I needed help. I guess the sight of a black man walking with a lighter-skinned child seemed suspicious. The police officers tried to lure me away with candy so they could question me and determine if I was really safe. I couldn't have been safer than with Jay. He is the kindest, most fair and loving man I have ever known. After a couple of questions, they let us go. Jay took great pride in his grandchildren and always encouraged Brandon and me to be both smart and tough. He loved to tease me. I would show up to his house in a dress with my hair all disheveled, legs covered in bruises and scabs. He'd tell me, "Amanda, you'll never be a model with your knees all bruised up like that." I thought it was absurd to think that I would want to be a model. I loved wearing makeup, painting my nails, and playing dress up, as long as it didn't interfere with rollerblading, skating, biking, and running. I was hopelessly a tomboy. Jay was quiet, smiled easy, and had a calm and gentle spirit. My most vivid memory of him was on a road trip to the beach with him, Ellen, and Brandon. We were getting ready to leave, and Ellen started yelling at Jay for something stupid. I refused to get in the car until she apologized. Jay came and sat by me on the sidewalk and said, "Don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff." I didn't like that answer at the time, but I've never forgotten his words of wisdom. It gave me insight into how he could live with a woman who constantly put him down. My grandparents' house was the hangout for all of my extended family. I remember lots of loud laughing and playful teasing between my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. We were not a perfect family, but I thought I had the best family in the world. Ellen would wake up every morning and belt out her favorite oldies songs. She'd blast her radio and sing along. Ellen had grown up in a Baptist church where she and her dad loved to lead worship. Although she eventually rebelled by becoming a Jehovah's Witness, her love for singing could be heard all day. In her late 20s, someone came to Ellen's door to preach about becoming a Jehovah's Witness. She began taking Bible study lessons from the Jehovah's Witnesses and attending congregation meetings held at the local Kingdom Hall. My grandma had found her new faith and stopped celebrating holidays and birthdays. She no longer participated in patriotism of any sort. This worked for her, but it was devastating and frustrating for her children. My grandpa was not brought up with any religion or belief about God, and he was not initially into her new faith. For many years, Jay didn't attend congregation meetings with her. However, Ellen pressed on and took all 4 of her children to every meeting, rain or shine. By the time I was old enough to notice, Jay was attending congregation meetings and was fairly involved in giving messages at our local Kingdom Hall. I felt secure, knowing I had the truth, and I had parents and grandparents teaching me about God and about the Bible. My family had a clear plan for my life, and I didn't have to worry about figuring out what I needed to know or do. It was all laid out for me. I never felt left out for not celebrating Christmas or my birthday. It was so normal not to celebrate holidays that I never gave it a second thought. I figured if God might kill me for celebrating those things, it's not worth it. It was normal to attend congregation meetings on Sunday mornings as well as Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and then go out knocking on people's doors Saturday mornings. Being a Jehovah's Witness was my identity, not simply a belief, but a way of life. I knew my parents weren't perfect, but I still pretty much believed God's hand was protecting my family, and He had given me the best parents I could ever imagine. My parents are so young, I will have them around forever, I thought. Not only were they young, but they were also cool. From a young age, I knew it was special to have parents who knew all the latest pop songs and could bust out all the new dance moves. They weren't like other kids' parents, and I loved that. When I started kindergarten, my parents started fighting a lot. At first it was yelling, then screaming, and ultimately ended with Mom throwing something, usually dishes. Glass would shatter throughout the room. One time she hit Dad's nose with the back of a hairbrush, and he made me take a picture of his bloody, swollen face. I always felt like I needed to pick a side, and surprisingly, Dad was usually the victim of Mom's violence. Their fighting terrified me. It was so loud and scary. I just wanted it to stop. Mom would always threaten, with your family history of abuse, you'll never get the kids. I didn't know what she was talking about, but I heard it enough to know that there were family secrets somewhere. Chapter 2, Dream House. My parents decided to move into one big house with my grandparents when I was in the 2nd grade. Ellen and Jay helped take care of my brother and me while my parents sorted themselves out. Mom went to work full-time as a teller at a local bank, and Dad worked as a screen printer at Boeing. My brother and I loved the new living arrangement. Our house had 7 fireplaces. This was a child's dream house. Our backyard became a small farm where we grew corn, kiwi, apples, cherries, grapes, and bamboo. We grew countless other plants inside a large greenhouse that was always warm and moist. I loved that greenhouse. It smelled like dirt and lavender. There was a window high up in the greenhouse which looked into my grandparents' bathroom. Their bathroom had a tanning bed built into it, as well as a walk-in tub that was so deep my brother and I would put on our bathing suits and swim in it. Our basement was very creepy and was mostly used to store things. There were 3 bedrooms and a bar down there that we rarely used. When the furnace turned on, it sounded like a roaring monster coming out of the basement, and usually was the signal to head upstairs quickly. Our new home was in a different school district within Bellevue, so I had to switch schools. The adventure of making new friends and meeting a new teacher was exciting. I had my mom and dad, brother, and grandparents all in one big house. Life was good. At first, things were calm and peaceful. In the evening, I would help my grandma cook meals, and we would spend lots of time together as a family. But soon, the fighting started again, and it was even worse than before. Mom and Dad were much more physical with each other and less careful about what they said out loud. Dad was constantly complaining about Mom opening credit cards and maxing them out. Mom complained that Dad didn't make enough money, and he was too controlling. It seemed so stupid and petty to me, but Mom moved her stuff out of my parents' room and into the basement. She began sleeping upstairs in my room most nights. I loved sharing a bed with her, but I always felt nervous because I didn't know what to expect next. How long will we share my bed? What is happening to my family? Chapter 3, Divorce. One night, Mom didn't come home. Dad called Brandon and me into his bedroom, and we walked across the hall in our jammies. "I need to talk with you both," he said. We stared up at Dad without the slightest idea what he was gearing up to tell us. Whatever he was about to say seemed heavy, big, and different from all the conversations we had ever had before. "Mommy and Daddy are getting a divorce." Brandon started crying right away. Dad sat on his bed, hugged us, and assured us it was going to be okay. My brother was only 7 and was devastated. He expressed his fears that he'd never see our mom again. Dad reassured him we would see Mom all the time. "No one is going anywhere," Dad promised. To some extent, I was relieved. This would finally be the end of all the fighting and the screaming. After all, it had only been a few nights since Mom had last given Dad another bloody nose. But because divorce was not allowed in our religion, it suddenly became very real and scary to me that this was a big decision, one that was going to have major repercussions for Mom and for our family. I knew my mom would get kicked out of the religion or disfellowshipped. According to what I had been taught, that meant she would be killed by Jehovah if she didn't change her mind and come back to my dad. That night, Mom left me, my brother, my dad, and our religion without any explanation. I was angry at Mom for not being there when Dad told us their decision. In my 9-year-old opinion, she single-handedly created this mess and then skipped out on the cleanup party. It felt as if she didn't care about us or our feelings, like she took a night off while we were left to pick up the pieces. Through his own pain and tears, Dad desperately tried to console my brother and me. He gave us all the love he could and let us know he would always be there for us. The 3 of us snuggled up in his bed, my dad in the middle, Brandon on one side, and I on the other, while my brother and I asked Dad question after question. Where is Mom going to live? When will we see her? Are we still a family? Dad answered each one patiently. Eventually, we fell asleep. Chapter 4, Living Nightmare. I woke up to someone softly rubbing my back. It was Dad. I was now sleeping on my stomach in the middle of the bed, and he was on my right side. It felt good and made me feel calm. After a while, I dozed off again, and that's when my dad began rubbing my butt. He kept running his fingers up and down my back, and every once in a while, back over my butt. I froze. I almost yelled at him, but I was paralyzed by fear. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I played dead. My thoughts ran wild. My heart was beating so hard and so fast, I'm surprised I didn't pass out. I tried to tell myself that my dad hadn't done anything wrong and that he would never hurt me. Maybe it was a mistake. If it doesn't happen again, I'll just forget about it. But he did it again, and it got worse. He began only rubbing my butt and eventually worked his way to rubbing me between my legs. That was it. I knew he knew what he was doing, and I was horrified. I remember thinking how lucky my little brother was to be lying there sound asleep. I could not believe this was happening to me, and I was allowing it to happen. I didn't stop him. I didn't even say no. My grandparents were asleep down the hall. My mom should have been home, but I didn't know where she was at. I was instantly trapped in a horrible nightmare. No matter what I thought about doing, the next step was always something I couldn't deal with. I felt I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. My thoughts ran wild. How can I stand up to Dad? He might spank me. What if I tell Ellen? She might call the police and they might take him away. I would never see him again. What if my brother hates me for taking his dad away? What if everyone at school finds out? Would my story end up on the news or in the newspaper? How humiliating! No one would be my friend anymore. No boy would ever want to date me. I would never get married and have kids. I was devastated. The very next day at school, we learned about stranger danger and how important it is to scream for help if someone tries to get you into that car. We learned about the scary men who circle around schools, luring children away from the safety of adults. We learned about strangers offering us candy in an effort to grab us if we got close enough to them. To me, these were all fake, made-up monsters. I had a real-life boogeyman, a monster I had been living with my whole life who I had just met the night before. I wanted to raise my hand and let my teacher know that my dad was that person. No teacher or student said anything about your own father trying to hurt you. At that moment, I realized I was so alone. I knew something I shouldn't know. I learned to be quiet and follow the lead of others because I was scared to death of letting anyone find out about my secret. I wasn't sure what was normal or weird, what was common knowledge or forbidden anymore. I was so confused and scared. Life went on. Mom eventually came home, completely moved into the basement. She had a room with her bed and clothes downstairs, as well as a living room with a couch and television. As time passed, Mom was around less and less. I avoided the cold and scary basement as much as I could, but I always wondered if she was home. I regularly peeked downstairs to see if she was there. Sometimes I would find her watching television and folding laundry, but many times I couldn't find her anywhere. She must be home after I go to sleep. About a month after Mom moved into the basement, she took my brother and me to a tiny apartment in Seattle. When we walked in there, there was an older man with gray hair sitting on a bed in the living room, watching the smallest television I had ever seen. His face lit up when he saw us. He had a calmness and a quietness about him. I wandered into the bathroom where I saw her clothes hanging in a small closet in front of the door. She had a sleeping bag and blankets on the floor of the closet. "Is that where you've been sleeping?" I asked. "Yes," Mom replied. I didn't know her anymore. Who is this woman who can just leave and not take me with her? Who is this other man? Who is this supposed mother who's too busy to notice me anymore? Later that day, I asked my dad if he knew about Mom's new living arrangement. Based on his reaction, I gather he had no idea. Dad called Mom at work and demanded to talk to her. When she showed up, they screamed like never before. This is all my fault. I should have kept my mouth shut. As I settled into bed that night, I thought I had single-handedly ruined any chance of my parents ever working things out. Now my dad was so angry, there's no way he'd take her back. The more I thought about it, the more angry I got at Mom. She used me. She didn't have the guts to tell Dad she was living with someone else, so she used me to do it. I hated her. Ever since she left, I've been stuck with way too much crap I didn't know how to deal with. It was she who left. And I've been trapped, playing the role of Dad's wife since the very night she abandoned us. If she had just been around, none of this would have happened. Chapter 5. Amplified Chaos. Soon my life became even crazier. We all moved out of the big Bellevue house, and every week Brandon and I lived between my grandparents' home, my mom's home, and Dad's home every week. Dad molested me a few more times before I realized these were not isolated incidents. This was my hellish new normal. Mom dated and broke up with many boyfriends, including a young man who stole car radios, a 70-year-old man, and some guy who tried to stab her for breaking up with him. Meeting one idiot after another was a complete irritation to my soul. My grandparents and my parents moved every year when their leases were up. Ellen always made sure she found a place with enough bedrooms for me and my brother. After 23 moves, I stopped counting. I learned to be organized to avoid forgetting things I wanted at the wrong house. After a while, I cared less and less about my things. I would lessen the torture of packing, moving, and unpacking by regularly throwing away my toys and clothes. Anyone could probably guess about how I feel about moving today. My brother and I started living mostly with my grandparents during the week by the time I was 10 or 11. Ellen taught me to make my bed every morning, how to sew, and to wear lipstick and put color on my cheeks, which I still don't do. She let me bake anytime I asked. We made almond roca, brownies, cookies, and cakes, but the thing she most wanted me to know was how to make a pie from scratch. She loved to take my brother and me everywhere she went. She usually picked us up from school and was the one who took us to meetings at the Kingdom Hall. Ellen took great care of us, but I wanted my mom around more. When Mom would come visit, she would often end up fighting with Ellen and leave. I don't remember seeing Mom very much while we lived with my grandparents, but Dad picked my brother and me up every Friday after he got off work. He never missed a weekend. My grandma warned Mom many times not to leave us kids. Fathers molest girls when their wives aren't there, she'd say. I'm not sure where Ellen got that idea, but somewhere she had learned certain patterns of sexual predators and was also completely against sleepovers in order to protect children. I got the impression from Mom that perhaps an uncle had sexually molested or abused my dad at some point in his childhood, and perhaps that was why Ellen was so keen on protecting us kids from that particular evil. Whenever Ellen expressed concern that my dad might sexually abuse me because my mom wasn't around, it would infuriate Mom to the point she'd storm out. I think Mom got angry because she knew she couldn't take care of us by herself and still keep up her life of dating and fun. So refusing my dad's help on the weekends was out of the question. My mom seemed to have an aversion to responsibility, especially when the pressure came from her own mother. But I honestly don't think Mom ever imagined my dad was sexually abusing me. Ellen asked me a few times if Dad had ever touched me inappropriately. I'd freeze. Did I act weird? Did I say something that gave her a clue? What did I do to make her ask me this? I always denied it. I hated when she asked me about my dad. I wanted my mom to ask me, not my grandma. Ellen was known to pick fights and say harsh things, especially to Mom. If I tell Ellen, she'll yell at Mom for leaving Dad. I feared a family meltdown. I could never tell Ellen. In 5th grade, Mom and her new boyfriend officially moved in together, so Brandon and I started living with them during the week. I made friends in school and always studied hard to get good grades. Schoolwork was my escape. As long as I could keep my mind busy doing homework or reading books, I could temporarily forget my reality. I started to obsess about my surroundings. Everything had to be clean, neat, organized. I was constantly cleaning. After vacuuming in perfect rows, I would climb on the furniture to exit the room so the carpet lines would stay untouched. I remember feeling overwhelmed at school because the name tag ripped at the top edge of my desk that had a crisp 90-degree corners while my desk had rounded corners. They did not match up, and I stared at it every day. It bothered me to the point where I could hardly hear anything my teacher said. My parents and grandparents noticed my clean freak nature, but I think they enjoyed the extra help around the house, so no one gave it much thought. The truth was that my life was out of control, and vacuum lines and organizing were two things I could control. My wifely duties increased on weekends with my dad. At only 11 years old, I cooked, cleaned, balanced Dad's checkbook, wrote up grocery lists, and even wrote checks to pay bills. Every Friday when we arrived at his dirty house, I'd yell at him, "This place is a mess!" I hated taking care of him. Dad would make me promise I wouldn't get married until I was 30. He said I would be a great wife because I liked to cook, bake, and clean the house all the time. He always told me that he loved me and he was so proud of me. It was hard to believe given all that he was putting me through. Dad had me on a pedestal with little compassion for my brother. He saw Brandon as an obstacle to having his way with me. I remember Dad would often be mean to my brother just to get him out of the room. Brandon was tender-hearted and artistic. He could draw anything, cars, people, you name it, extremely well. Go draw me a dinosaur, Dad would tell Brandon. My brother had no idea Dad was just trying to get him out of the way so he could be alone with me. Weekend after weekend, month after month, every single time I stayed at my dad's, he would sexually abuse me. He touched me inappropriately and asked, "How does that feel?" Everything inside me screamed at him, but words never came out. He would kiss my lips, tell me he wanted to marry me, and make me model lingerie for him. When I showered, he'd pick the lock, get into the shower with me, and make me clean him. Sometimes when I was working on schoolwork, he put on pornographic movies and stare at me to see my reaction. I tried to ignore it and continue what I was doing, but it was almost impossible. I felt incredibly disturbed and wished he would fall over dead right in front of me. Every Sunday when I got back home, I would complain to my mom about how much I hated going to my dad's. She would laugh a little. Since she hated him so much, I think she assumed it was only normal for me to hate him too. She had no idea the real reason I couldn't stand weekends at Dad's. Chapter 6, The Elders. I need to talk to the elders about what I've been doing with you, Dad told me one morning. I was scared. Do you want to talk to them too? He asked. No, I replied. I was too embarrassed. That's fine. Just do me a favor. Don't tell Ellen what I've been doing until I talk to the elders. Not yet, okay? Hope filled my soul. He's going to do the right thing. I agreed not to tell yet. Shortly after that conversation, we met with 3 elders at the Kingdom Hall. I waited outside while Dad talked to them in their boardroom. When they finished, the elders asked if I would like to talk to them. I didn't want to, but I complied. I was 11 years old, alone in a room with 3 men, and I could not have been more uncomfortable. Is there anything you want to tell us? They asked. No, I replied. Do you want to talk to us? Not really, I said. Is it true that your dad is touching you? Yes. I felt terrified every second I was in there. When we were free to go, I was relieved my nightmare was over. I was sure the elders would call the police as soon as we left. As we made our way out to the car, I walked slowly. I tried to stall so the police would have time to tear through the parking lot and take me away from my dad before we left. They hadn't arrived yet. We got in our car and left. I kept an eye out for police cars coming to pull my dad over. We got to my dad's house and I kept waiting for my mom or grandma to show up. I expected the police to come knocking at our door any minute. Nothing happened. I was hopeful my dad's abuse would stop once the elders knew, but it continued. Every siren I heard for months made me think, oh good, they found me. For years, nothing happened. The cycle would repeat itself. My dad would sexually abuse me, and he'd go confess to different elders in different congregations. Sometimes I had to go with him. Other times he would just tell me about the meetings he had with the elders. It's just a matter of time before I get help. The elders are working with police to put my case together, and soon I will be rescued. Chapter 7, Parents. Dad took Brandon and me to Jehovah's Witness meetings every weekend and put on like he was such a great father. He loved the attention he got when he told single women his wife had left him. I'm surprised my eyes didn't get stuck in the back of my head from all the eye rolling I did. In the opinion of the congregation and my family, Dad was the solid, steady, responsible parent. Little did they know. Dad took us to people's houses for dinner, to congregation picnics, and even to adult-only parties with drinking and loud music. He was the life of every party, and all his friends made my brother and me feel welcome. We laughed a lot. Dad and I would stay up and watch Saturday Night Live together. After leaving a Jehovah's Witness meeting about putting others first one Sunday, we cracked up about what it would look like to actually live out what we were just told in the message. He joked that no one would leave the parking lot because everyone would just keep waving the other person to go first. I loved all the fun things we would do during the day, but I hated evenings at his house. It was so confusing. My time with Dad would be perfect if he would just stop touching me. I didn't have the courage to do anything to stop him. He would molest me beneath a blanket in people's homes right in front of others. Whenever we were swimming, he would molest me in the water. I was never safe around him. If he thought he could get away with it, he did it. It was as if he got a rush from the possibility of getting caught. I was so embarrassed every time he touched me that I would mentally shut off. If I could, I would pretend to be asleep. I believe sometimes God protected me that way because I would fall asleep as my dad started to abuse me, and I would have no recollection of anything when I woke up. Sleeping and playing dead became my ways to escape. Mom became a 911 dispatcher for the Bellevue Police Department when I was 11. She absolutely loved that job and went to work dispatching helicopters, she went on to work dispatching helicopters to trauma patients at the Boeing airfield. She had found her calling and poured all of her problem-solving talent into her work. When I was 12, Mom remarried. She and my stepdad, Rick, were inseparable. Mom had just started as a 911 dispatcher, and Rick was a police officer. He went to see who the new voice on the radio belonged to, and the rest is history. On her days off, she would ride in the cop car with him. They loved to travel and especially liked going on cruises together. Mom let me stay at Ellen and Jay's to finish 6th grade. But going into 7th grade, I was going to have to move back in with Mom and her new husband. I did not like my stepdad. The first time I met him, I reached out to shake his hand and he twisted my wrist behind my back until I dropped to my knees. I was so scared. I already have enough I can't handle with my own dad, and now I'm going to have to spend 5 days of the week with a stranger who's even meaner? I ran upstairs crying. Rick was a cop through and through. He yelled at us kids as if we were in the military and supposed to be running drills. He was very loud and cold toward us. I didn't feel safe around him. With all that was going on at my dad's, I found it extremely difficult to connect with this hard, distant personality. I had wanted my mom to marry someone I could cuddle up with, someone who could be my ideal dad since my real dad was such a failure. I was in 6th grade and desperate for love. My stepdad was just another adult I had to protect myself from, not physically, but emotionally. Early into their marriage, Mom and Rick had 2 boys, 15 months apart. It was often my job to babysit and care for my baby brother's needs. I was glad Mom was more settled and had come back into my life, but she was still busy, working, taking care of babies, and hanging out with her husband. Mom's desire to have whatever she wanted, when she wanted it, was the detriment of our family. Rick had to work overtime to pay for her insatiable spending habits. One of the only benefits of Mom's spending was that, paired with her petite stature, I could wear all of her stylish clothes starting in 5th grade. It was hard to get time alone with my mom, but when I did, she was usually fun and incredibly patient. She always had Costco food for me and my friends. At Mom's place, anything went. In middle school, Brandon and his friends wanted cigarettes, so Mom bought some and told them, "This is bad for you guys and gross, but go ahead and try it." When the school would call to tattle about something my brother or I did, she put the babies on the phone and let them scream in the officer's ear. Underage drinking was about the only thing we weren't allowed to do because my stepdad was a cop. I wanted to tell my mom why I hated going to my dad so much, but I couldn't find the words to tell her. She would let me talk to her for hours while we folded laundry or cooked. I craved her attention and sometimes would say in a serious tone, "Mom?" When she would answer back, "What?" or "Yes," I would stop and say, "Oh, never mind. It's nothing." I was trying to find the courage to tell her that my dad was hurting me and I desperately needed her to help me, but I just wasn't brave enough. And she never insisted that I tell her what I was thinking, so I didn't. I knew Mom would come out with guns blazing if I really needed her. I just couldn't find the words. I saw how protective she was of my brother. He was a shy, gentle, and sweet kid. When Brandon was in 2nd grade, a bully was tormenting him. Mom told me to take care of it, but I was scared of getting in trouble. So one day she showed up unannounced to Brandon's classroom. She found the kid sitting next to Brandon, picked him up by his coat and asked him if his name was whatever his name was, and told him that he better keep his hands off her son or the next time he wouldn't be so lucky. She was sent to the principal's office. Apparently, she made quite the impression on him because a few days later, I beat up a kid at recess and the principal told me to apologize and then whispered to me, "I trust you will tell your mom about all this." "Yes," I said, but I never mentioned it again. In 6th grade, I told the choir director I couldn't sing holiday songs because it was against my religion. My mom wasn't even a Jehovah's Witness anymore, but she took her loaded gun to the school to defend her daughter's religious beliefs. What? I have a license to carry, she told me as she left for my middle school. It must have been a sight to see that 5'1" firecracker give the 6'9" blonde, blue-eyed choir director a piece of her mind. Thankfully, her words were convincing enough without the weapon. It was decided that I would write a 10-page paper on Beethoven as a substitute for the choir performance. Mom could be there for these instances, which were so minor compared to what I was suffering through, but she just couldn't be there for the day-to-day to really know what was going on.